So they had to flip through a picture album of children, and they got to my picture and they're like, we'll take her.
Hello, passionate listeners and watchers. Welcome to Passion Harvest. I am Louisa, your host. Thank you so much for joining me wherever you are in the world right now. I'm so excited about our guest today, Nakuset. Nakuset was chosen from a catalogue of First Nation children and raised in a Jewish family. Between the 1960s and 1985, thousands of Indigenous children were removed from their families, often without parents' consent, and adopted out under the program known as the Sixties Scoop. Nakuset was taken from her Cree family as a toddler. She was taught to disregard her Indigenous roots and assimilate into a new mould. Eventually, she reached her breaking point and began the arduous search for her biological family. But it also led to the discovery of her own voice and her mission to support Indigenous people in the face of adversity. Nakuset is the executive director of the Native Women's Shelter of Montreal and co-director of Resilience Montreal. Recently, Nakuset received Woman of the Year award. This is her story and this is her passion. Nakuset, I'm so excited and honored to have you on Passion Harvest today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Well, I've already done your introduction. Let's just get started for the audience. Do you mind just explaining what the Sixties Scoop was? Just a bit of a background.
So if you think of residential schools being sort of like a federal initiative, the Sixties Scoop was a provincial one. So every single province participated and they did it through adoption. So all the adoption agencies had to sort of remove all their white children and they only received Native children that were up. And the thing was that the social workers would go into the family homes, take pictures of the children, and then they were submitted as, an adoptable child. But the problem is that most of the parents had absolutely no idea that their children were up for adoption. And that's literally what happened to me. I was at the foster home at the time and a social worker came in, took my picture, and I was living in Thompson, Manitoba at the time. And they sent my picture over to Montreal, which is quite far. Mm-hmm. And my parents looked at a book at Jewish Family Services. What's interesting was they had gone to Jewish Family Services a year prior and were able to choose any kind of child. And they chose like this white boy, this baby. And then when they went back, because they didn't think they could have children, they only had Native kids. So they had to flip through a picture album of children. And they got to my picture and they're like, we'll take her. So I was removed from that foster home in Manitoba and then just put on a plane, brought to Montreal. And then it was like, okay, change your name, change your identity. And they're going to grow up in a nice white home and everything's going to be fine, which it isn't. I came with memories. I came with, I guess, a little bit of baggage. And I think, my parents were kind of scratching their head going, what do we do with this kid? Like, this kid is not like, she was so cute in the picture and now she's like, sullen and unhappy. So you have to understand that I'm being adopted and I have a blonde brother and a blonde sister and I look like an alien. They're like, so that whole sort of question about, well, why do you have this last name and you look completely different? And my parents were like, okay, well, if people ask you that question, you tell them you're Israeli because Israelis are dark. I was like, but why? Why would I lie? Why can't I just say that I'm Native? So I already had a bit of a rebellion at that age. And I kind of stuck to my guns. I really they didn't want me to be proud necessarily of my culture. And you have to understand that in the 70s, when my adoption went through, the kind of media and the kind of knowledge of Indigenous people was incredibly negative. So I think people just learned about us from like cowboy and Indian movies, right? Like, that's it. I think that, when I was adopted, my parents thought that kind of used that whole reverse psychology where they're like, you don't really want to be part of this culture. Stop trying to identify yourself with this. with the Jewish culture, you can have so much. You could, we're going to open the door so that you have like a full life. And if you go down that other path about, wanting to be Indigenous and knowing who your real family is, it's not going to be a good story. So just don't go there. But I mean, every day you look in the mirror and you know who you are. You can't ignore that, that you're Indigenous. And I'm not sure why I've always had this sort of like cultural pride, but I really wanted to learn everything that I could about being Indigenous. And, the content was not around. I went to Hebrew school. They changed my birth name was Margaret Murray. They changed it to a Jewish name. And then I even got a Hebrew name on top of that. I was expected to, only be in the Jewish community and, sort of going to these different, camps and different schools that, that I should mingle within their community. But I was always sort of like being a fish out of water. Like it was very strange. And you have to understand my parents they came from a wealthier, background. And I didn't really desire that wealth. My parents lived in a particular area in Montreal called Westmount. And Westmount is just like mansion after mansion. And what's nice about Westmount is that back in the day, before, I guess, Europeans came up, it was Mohawk territory, and they used to do a lot of like ceremonies up in that area. They had like trails there. So there's something like when you're walking around Westmount, there's a calmness. You can almost feel the spirit. So I remember walking around as a teenager and feeling good in the space, but walking around looking at these houses and feeling like I was just a visitor. Like, I am never going to be moving into any of these houses when I move out. This is not going to be my life. Like I knew it back then. And it was difficult because I had to sort of make a choice about where did I want to go. And that was so hard about, being a teenager, going to school, knowing that you have a future, but what is your future? And which life are you going to live in? And am I going to just keep denying that, Indigenous and pretending that I'm not when clearly I am, and when is the good time to sort of embrace the Indigenous community in Montreal? So yeah, there was a couple of years where I was sort of like, on that line of, which path do I go?
Yeah, I mean, look, all those universal questions, I guess, so many people hopefully ask themselves, get curious. Who am I? Why am I here? What am I doing? What is my path? I wanted to ask you, did you find a resemblance of love in your adopted family?
I had the most incredible grandmother, and in Yiddish she was called Bubby, and she was the best. And like from the moment we met, we just were, she was that woman that every time I walked into a room, her face would light up. She was so happy to see me. She completely took me under her wing. She always had positive words for me. She was like my champion.
Your angel.
And yeah, she was just the best person ever. I mean, I think that everyone who met her felt the same way about her because she just had this really beautiful energy. She had an amazing laugh. She was unbelievably caring, and she didn't take crap from anyone. So yeah, she was really great. Yeah. So, I mean, she was my go-to person. She was like the person that, I would love to spend time with whenever I could. And, eventually I left home. I left home at 18. I mean, that's usually the age where you're allowed to leave your house. So it was pretty much a countdown from like when I was 6. I'm like, okay, how many years do I have to do here? Like jail time.
I mean, I just can't even imagine what those feelings must be like. And, who loves me? Just, all children, really need that love, or even not love, just kindness. Did you find kindness in your home?
Not so much. No, not from my parents. I think, I mean, my adopted father was a businessman, or is a businessman, and he was not around you know, like every day he traveled, you know. My mother, you know, I mean, she raised us. We also had like a slew of nannies throughout the years. But I was always considered like the problem child. Always. There was always something wrong with me. So that was really difficult because I didn't really fit into that box. And I also had the resistance of not wanting to, and they couldn't get over that because it was just like, this is how everyone else dresses. I'm like, why? I want to dress like that. It's terrible. They're like, what do you mean, why? That's the, you know, everyone listens to this music. I'm like, are you joking? I don't want to listen to that. So there was that kind of a bit of rebellion throughout, and they just like were scratching their head. They're like, well, why? Why is she like this? And I guess, you know, also the fact that, you know, because I, you know, came from, you know, 3 very difficult years going from foster home to, you know, being moved all over, I still had, you know, sort of, you know, different kind of baggage or even, you know, walls that were up. Like I was able to, you know, my adopted mother used to say that I was very street smart. I don't know.
Well, you've certainly have had a lot of life experiences, even at the age of 3. My gosh.
Yeah, and I could also just see that, you know, the kind of values that they had and the way they, being like an Indigenous person and hearing some of the comments they made about other people that weren't in their family, you know, different races or different, you know, it was really derogatory. I was like, that's pretty bad. Like, I don't understand. Like they didn't, anyway, I don't know. They were just, you know, sending them light and love and, you know, like I have no ill will towards them. They did what they did. And I was able to move out at 18 and, you know, live my life the way I have. And, you know, I mean, I don't know. I think that, you know, I believe in karma. And I think that when you do negative things, that, you know, one day you'll have to answer to it. And I think that's maybe something that I know moving forward in my life, I try not to, I try to do things in a good way. And I try to, you know, even like my bubby used to say, be careful about what you say because you can never take it back. And even though you can get angry in an argument or whatever, to just not say those negative words. So I received a lot of negativity and I'm thinking, you know, perhaps one day they'll have to struggle with that. Or maybe they won't. Maybe it'll just be like, you know, water off a duck's back. Like, what? Yeah, that was offensive?
Look, you know, thank you for sharing pieces of your childhood. I know you don't want to go into detail and you're not comfortable with the trauma that you experienced. Did you, just a question, were you worried at some point that they'd ever give you back, and give you back to who? Was that a concern?
That's funny because I actually had just before I moved out of home, there was a conversation about that, about maybe them sending me back to my what's difficult is they would portray a picture of Indigenous people and my community in the most negative fashion. So over the years, when you're constantly being told, if you go back to the reservation, all the boys will rape you and all the girls will beat you up because they are jealous that you grew up in Westmount. If you go to the reservation, all they have are drugs and alcohol. So all these really negative things, you know, like your mother never cared about you and this kind of thing. And we got into sort of a crossroads where it's like, you know what? We think we're just going to send you back now. You've been really difficult for us.
Oh, gosh.
Like, you know what? I'm out. And that's actually how I left home. I didn't just leave home. I pretty much ran away, you know, because one night I just decided I'm out and I took some stuff and I didn't tell them and I was gone. So, but I always think that because I was 18, that, you know, it's not really running away if you're 18, but, you know, I made that choice. They had portrayed a picture of my Indigenous family as so horrible and then were basically rejecting me saying, you know, things have not worked out in this family and you're not abiding by our rules and what our expectations of you, and therefore we'll just send you back to like Manitoba. And I'm like, well, I don't know Manitoba and I don't know where you're going to send me, but I do know Montreal and I could try to find a life here. So thank you very much for your offer of a plane ticket, but I'm out. And I just left. And, you know, I think for them, what was difficult about me leaving was that, you know, Jewish girls don't leave home unless they're getting married or unless they're getting, you know, going to some university. Otherwise, you live with your parents. And when I left, then there were questions from the community as to what happened. So I left, and then people ask questions. And now, currently, I don't exist. Okay, I know it's not really funny, but, you know, like my, you know, when my adopted brother passed away, there's always like something that's in the newspaper, you know, where they do an announcement and they'll mention my brother and only having one sister, even though he has two. So I don't exist. Like, I'm not allowed to be spoken of. I'm not allowed to be referred to. Like, it's just, don't go there. Don't talk about her. Don't. So, and I think it's because, well, I don't know exactly why, but I think I insulted them by leaving because they really felt you could have all this if you stay with us, and you rejected that. And why, in God's name, would you go back to that community? Why? And, you know, it's what I did. Right. And I wanted to create my own community. So that's basically what I've been doing, you know, in Montreal is the thing about the 60s Scoop is that I know a lot of other Indigenous kids that were adopted by Jewish families. And the reality is most of them had as bad as as bad as relationship as I had, or worse. And sometimes when you're in these, when you have this kind of relationship, and if you don't have proper coping skills, you kind of, you know, when I left home, the only person I had who was positive in my life was my bubby. And she really saw that I could be something in my life. I remember she used to say, you know, you're going to do great things one day. And I remember, you know, my parents telling me, you're going to be a prostitute or a drug addict. That's your future.
I'm so
right.
Sorry.
So, well, you know, so when my bubby would say that to me, I'm like, no, I'm going to go to jail. That's my future. That's what I've been told. So
why do you think your parents chose you?
Well, the
From
thing
a
is that
catalogue?
well, because that's all they had, right? They went to Jewish Family Services and they're like, okay, we want a kid. This is what we're giving. Oh, okay. Oh, we'll take her.
But you kept your essence, your strength throughout this. And I know you spoke about it, your grandmother who always valued you. And from what I understand is she helped you find your biological family, which I think took 20 years.
Yeah, well, she was really great because, I mean, you know, I would almost see her every weekend after I left home. And, you know, I would always talk to her about what I was doing. And it was really important that I got my Indian status because, you know, once I left home, I received nothing financially. So I had to make it on my own. But part of my Indian status, part of the treaty is that, you know, if you're a status Indian, then you can get your post-secondary education completely paid for.
Right.
So I wanted to get that, but I needed to get my Indian status. You know how difficult it is to, like, I went to the Native Friendship Center and they were like, who's your mom? I'm like, I don't know. Who's your dad? I don't know. What nation are you? I think I'm Cree. They're like, okay, we'll get on it. It's really hard to get your Indian status when you've been taken away, you know, through the 60 Scoop. They don't keep the records.
So
they're
you
trying
had
to assimilate you.
no names of your family or your
Nothing.
mother?
I didn't even know my real birth name.
Wow.
I only found that out much later. So, you know, they started the paperwork. The way I was able to get the information, which is really sad, was that when, oh my God, okay, this is very like convoluted, so I'm warning you. My mother, my biological mother, She had 7 children. Um, During, sometime in her life when she was probably in her 30s, she married a white man named John Murray. And he had already had something like 13 children, and his wife had passed away. So he ended up marrying my mother. And he adopted me, even though I'm not his biological child. So that's when I became Margaret Murray. And he adopted my older sister, who was not his child, and she became Sonia Murray. Then when he passed away, that's actually when all the trouble started with youth protection, because he was very, he was stable and he had a beautiful home and we lived with him. But after he passed away, my mother, sort of had difficulty. When he passed away, he put us in his will. When my sister Sonia turned 18, she saw the will and she saw the list and she saw my name. She was like, there she is. There's my sister. My sister's in Montreal. I'm going to find her. She got in touch with the trust company. The trust company said, I'm sorry, we're not allowed to tell you where she is. She's like, well, I will write a letter. Can you mail it to her on my behalf? And when she mailed the letter to my house when I was like 15, my parents ripped it up. Oh. They didn't want to have anything to do. But the information, the family talked about it. So my bubby already knew that there was family looking for me. So later on, when I left home and I ended up getting part of the estate, that's when she's like, look at all these brothers and sisters you have. You write to every single one of them. You explain who you are. You tell them you're looking for your mom and your sister and you want your Indian status. And maybe someone still lives there. And of course, the documents were quite old, but one brother who remembered me. And he's like, when I finally got in touch with him, he's like, I used to change your diapers. You know what's really hard about the 60s Scoop was he was willing to take me, but the government really wanted to put me with a white family, even though he himself was well established and he had a mining company in Flin Flon, Manitoba. They still decided, no, we'll place her with a white family. So that is how I found my sister. So it was through my bubby, and her encouragement to do this letter campaign. I found my sister, and then I went home. Well, I went to Manitoba to go and finally meet her, and that was really good, to meet her. And then I had another brother, Wayne, and a couple of other siblings that I met, and nieces and nephews, and it was good to come back. And what was hard was my bubby was dying at that time. She had cancer, and she was really worried about what would happen to me after she left this world. So she really wanted me to have that support system. And she knew that it wasn't going to be my adopted family. So she's like, let's try your Indigenous family. And those sort of negative, stories that they would reject me and hate me and all that were not true at all. They were so happy. My sister was so happy. But the history that we have is very, very difficult. And but the bond that I had with Sonia was intense. And my bubby gave me unconditional love, and then she died, and then it was replaced by Sonia. So I had that.
And then Sonia passed away as well.
Yeah, I think it's going to be close to 4 years now. The thing is that, because the reality, the truth of the matter is that every time I meet a family member, there's the excitement of knowing your family and the realization of what happened when we were separated and the years in between, and the pain that was caused, and the fact that we can never get that back. We're living almost like different realities in different parts of the country. And it was too much for Sonia. She was just tired of the constant fighting. And when we talk about intergenerational trauma, she's someone that was able to, we all carry the trauma, but she continued it, right? So a lot of the behaviors that our mother presented to her, she ended up presenting to her children. And she really couldn't like she felt very guilty about it, but very stuck. Like, why can't I, get along with my children? Why can't I relate to my children? Why can't I? Like, what is that sort of obstacle that's not allowing me? Like, she needed to have a lot of, like intergenerational trauma counselors, someone who would work with her through it. But, she just didn't have the time or the resources for it. I did the best that I could as her sister to always be there for her and support her in any way possible, and it leaves me with a lot of guilt because I run the Native Women's Shelter. So I should have the tools to help her. And I really tried at the end when I knew that she was going to, commit suicide, because what she had done was she sent me one of those like suicide videos. So basically, if you're watching this, it's because, right? So in her video, she basically said, listen, I need you to continue for me. I need you to let people know about what the 60s Scoop does to people, how it really affects people. And that was like her dying wish. So it's the reason why I talk about her. It's the reason why I share about her, because I want to honor her last wish, even though it's difficult. And she was really like the strongest person that I ever met. So it floored me when she died. And so now I have to push forward as hard as I can forever. I don't know how many years I'm on this earth, right? But I have to honor her wishes, and I have to try to break the barriers that face Indigenous people. And I do it with like, a crazy commitment and I don't know, like I do the best that I can. I pull in the resources that I can. I pull in the geniuses to write the proposals. I am not afraid to meet with any of the, levels of government, municipal, provincial, federal. I say it like it is. And, thankfully working at the shelter, I have like a really good track record of creating projects and moving things forward. And, of course, I have a fantastic group of people that are around me, because I certainly don't do it by myself, but I'm sort of the visionary of this is what could work. And, I just, the reality is that even though what happened in the 60 Scoop, there is no longer a 60 Scoop, it continues to happen. You can go to Manitoba, and I think like 90% of the children that are in youth protection are Indigenous. And there are so many kids in care that when you're like a certain age, like, maybe 15 years old, they just put you in a hotel. They're like, just wait here, your social worker will show up. Those kids, they end up getting, they're the ones that end up getting missing and murdered, right? Like something's gotta be fixed. So what I do, is try to create programming. And if it's successful, then maybe someone will go, oh, look what Montreal's doing, we're gonna replicate it, right? So that's basically what I do. I do everything I can to honor my sister's last wish, and I work really, really, really hard. Really hard.
I mean, you're the epitome of someone with passion. I've stopped crying now, so that's okay.
Sorry about that.
But oh my gosh, you certainly are, living your path and your passion, and you spent years searching for your purpose and your passion. What, for people that are listening to this episode, whatever situation they might be in, but looking to find, what is my meaning? How can I create change in the world? How did you find this continued strength and essence of yourself? What's your advice to give to the listeners?
First of all, when I was a kid, I always knew I wanted to be in the helping field. So that was like, that was my, like, what your purpose is when you're young, what you're naturally good at. And I felt like I could be helpful. I just felt that I could. I needed to get the training, getting a degree and all that, right? Because after I got my Indian status, that's the first thing I did. I went back to university and I have a degree in applied human sciences. I have a BA in human relations. Like my joke is now I can get along with my parents,
Gosh.
which I don't. But anyway, but but like you know what you're naturally good at and what you want to do, and you should always do, like, you should have a career that is doesn't feel like a career. Like, I often feel like I can't believe they pay me to do this. Like, I love what I do. I love the fact that I can, create change and talk to different people and, create like I do a lot of different stuff. Like in Montreal, I have Resilience Montreal, which is a shelter that we're turning into like a wellness center for the homeless, which is a whole thing that people are like, what is that? What's a wellness center for the homeless? I'm like, wait and see. Like, we're in the process. We already have a building. We just bought a new building. Interview me in another year when we open it, and I'll tell you all about that. We have the Raphael Andre tent. I have a project for missing and murdered Indigenous women called Ishwe. I have the Cabot Square project. Like this is fun stuff for me. Most people would like run screaming from the room, and I'm like, are you kidding? This is great. I get to work with different people, and I get to vision what I want to do. But again, know what your natural talent is and go for it. Ask always for advice from others that are more equipped than you are. So I don't actually think I'm really smart, but I surround myself with geniuses, and nobody seems to notice that I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just like, this is what I would like to do. How do I do it? What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Help me write the proposal. Thank you so much. Presented and approved, right? So, get a mentor. Having a mentor is amazing. I mean, my bubby was my mentor, and then Rena Daibo from Gunawage has been my other mentor. She was the one who said, you'd be a great director for the Native Women's Shelter when, the position came up. I'm like, what are you talking about? I would be a terrible one. Apparently, so far I'm okay, right? So, those are pretty important things. And, the thing is that I don't really have a choice to give up, especially after what happened to my sister. I don't have a choice. I know if I don't keep fighting, I know what the alternative is, and I'm not going there, right? I think that when you have a title like executive director, it comes with a responsibility, and you need to like use that title to push through all those doors that have been closed. You need to be completely persistent, and you need to find another way in. So sometimes I'm like, just try to say no to me. Just try. I will find another way. So yeah, that's basically, but maybe it's my bubby that's watching me from wherever she is. I mean, I'm just gonna assume it's heaven, but anyways, that's a Christian thing. I don't know. Anyway, I'm a Jew. I don't know. Anyway, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like, I believe that, I believe my bubby's spirit is watching over me, and I believe that I also have Indigenous spirits that have been leading me on the right path, because I really could have ended up in a completely different way. I really believe that there is some sort of guiding force, and you only have one life, and you can make change. And I'm doing the best that I can to do that. I'm using all the resources around me. And, it's not easy. Like, it is not easy. I know I might make it look like it seems easy, but it's not. It's constantly, thinking and talking and preparing, and, but it's, like our history is so sad. It is so sad, our history, right? So if you have that power to make, to create programming to make it better for that next generation, there's something like with the Indigenous people, we call it the 7th generation prophecy. So this is a prophecy that elders have talked about, and they actually say it's those that were taken away are going to like come back, and they're going to lead the way. So it's like those that were brought by the Sixties Scoop. I mean, it's not word for word, but they said that, it would be those that sort of walk between two worlds, right? And that's That's how I'm described, as being brought up in a white family, but being Native and walking between. And I know how the white world works, and I know what they want to see when they have a proposal. I can use the expertise that I learned in my adopted family and bring that in, right? And I can use the knowledge from the community and bring that in and find some kind of happy medium and move forward. And I've been very lucky to get as far as I have. And yeah, I still want to do probably another 100 things before my time's up. So
I'm sure you will. It's funny, I was almost going to say just before you said that, it's almost like you've got a foot in two worlds. Well, in this world and the non-physical realm, your ancestors and your grandmother that are guiding you. And that's beautiful. Nakuset, thank you so much for being on Passion Harvest. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the Passion Harvest audience that I haven't asked you?
No.
Good. We covered a lot, and I really want to thank you so much for your openness and honesty, and the work you're doing is absolutely amazing and very much needed in the world. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It was really great to talk to you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Sorry I made you cry.
That's okay. If you liked this episode, please do subscribe for weekly, passionate, inspirational interviews.